Theme number 5, Installation, Environment, Participation, Immersion. Today we are moving even farther away from the traditional object. In the previous theme, we look at light as something that could transform perception and change the way a room feels. This week we take the next step. The room itself becomes the artwork. The opening image is Theme Lab Borderless, and it gives us a strong preview of today's theme. Notice that we are no longer looking at a single painting, sculpture, or object placed in front of us. Instead, we are entering an environment that surrounds the viewer and asks the body to move through it. That is the major shift today. Installation art changes the question from what I am looking at to what kind of space I am entering and how am I being asked to behave inside of this. In this kind of work, walls, floors, light, sound, objects, pathway, and even other people can all become part of the piece. As we go through the lecture, keep one big question in mind. If an artwork only fully exists when you step inside, move through it, or interact with it, where does the art actually reside? Is it in the materials, in the space, or in the experience itself? By the end of today's lecture, you should be able to do three things. First, identify how installation art transforms space into an artwork itself. That means recognizing the artwork is not always a separate object placed inside a room. Sometimes the room, the site, or environment is the medium. Second, describe how participation, movement, and immersion shape the viewer's experience. In installation art, viewers often do more than look. They walk, enter, wait, touch, navigate, build, respond, or become conscious of their own bodies in relation to the work. Third, compare 5 directions in installation art that appear in this presentation. Happening, digital immersion, environmental intervention, techno-organic installation, and narrative world building. Those categories will help you sort together works that are all installations, but they use very different methods and have very different goals. If you can explain one work using at least one vocabulary term, one theme claimed, and a few concrete details about what the viewer is asked to do, you will be in a very good shape for the quiz. Let's define installation art clearly. Installation art is usually a large-scale, mixed-media construction designed for a particular place or a temporary period of time. Rather than offering a self-contained object, it transforms a space and asks the viewer to enter, move through it, and interact with it. That distinction matters. In a traditional gallery, the room is often just a neutral container for the artwork. In installation art, the room stops being neutral. Space itself becomes active. It is shaped, it is staged, interrupted, or reimagined. The near terms on this slide are useful because they show how broad this field is. Environments suggest works you enter physically. Happenings points to temporary events involving action and audience participation. Site-specific art reminds us that some works only make sense in a particular place. Immersive experiences emphasize totally sensory involvement. Participatory art highlights the fact that the viewer may help complete the work. The Theme Lab image is a good reminder that installation art can also be contemporary and technologically complex. Even so, the core idea stays the same. The viewer is inside the artwork, not outside of it. So why this theme matters? This theme matters because installation art changes the basic structure of viewing. Instead of asking, what object am I looking at? Installation art asks, what kind of space am I entering? And how is this shaping my experience? That is a very important shift in modern and contemporary art. The viewer is no longer standing at a safe distance from the work. The viewer becomes physically involved with it. Meaning is shaped by movement, participation, and duration. Installation art also blurs boundaries between art, architecture, theater, technology, and everyday life. A work may feel like a room, a stage set, an event, a playground, a public intervention, or a story world. The Houston image on the slide is especially useful for us. Even though this is an online course, our class is based in Houston, and Meow Wolf Houston gives us a local example of how installation art creates immersive environments. It shows that this theme is not remote or abstract. It is part of the contemporary cultural landscape students may actually encounter. Here are the main terms to keep in mind. Installation art, a three-dimensional environment designed to transform the viewer's perception of a space. Immersion, the feeling of being surrounded by a fully enveloped in an artificial environment. In other words, you feel inside the work rather than being outside. Participation, the viewer's active physical and social involvement as a required part of the artwork. In some works, nothing really happens until people enter, move, touch, or act. Site-specific, artwork created to exist in a particular place. If you remove it from that place, part of its meaning changes or disappears. Happening, a temporary event combining art, performance, and audience involvement. This term is especially associated with Alan Capro. These are quiz words, but more importantly, they are ways to think. They help us explain not only what a work looks like, but how it operates in space and how it depends on the viewer. We will again use the four-step method, but today we need to adapt for installation art. First, describe. Ask what is physically present. Are there objects, sounds, projections, found materials, architectural changes, pathways, instructions, or barriers? Installation art often combines many media at once. Second, analyze. Ask how the work guides the body. Are you meant to walk, squeeze through it, wait, climb, build, touch, or interact? In installation art, bodily movement is one of the formal choices. Third, context. Ask where the work exists. Is it a museum? It is outdoors? Or it's in a public park, online? Or in a commercial entertainment environment? Context matters because it changes the meaning of participation. Fourth, interpret. Ask what experience feels like. Is it playful, overwhelming, intimate, theatrical, communal, strange, or reflective? With installation art, emotional and bodily responses are often part of the meaning. Here is our guiding question. If an artwork requires you to step inside and interact with it for it to work, are you the viewer or are you also part of the medium? This question gets to the heart of the installation art. In painting, the viewer is usually outside the work. In installation art, the viewer is often built into the structure of the piece. Your movement may activate it, your body may complete it, your participation may become one of its materials. The Meow Wolf image here makes that question vivid. This is not a work that simply asks for detached observation. It asks for exploration, curiosity, bodily presence. The experience unfolds because people enter it. So one of the main ideas for today is that installation art often redistributes authorship. The artist sets conditions, but the viewer's presence helps produce the final experience. Our anchor artist is Alan Capro. Capro matters because he helped invent the idea of the happening and shifted art from static object to lived event. That is one of the great turning points in post-war art. He helped artists imagine that art could be something people do, inhabit, and experience together, rather than something they simply look at on a wall. He also expanded art in full environments that require the viewer's physical presence. Ordinary materials, simple actions, everyday behavior they became central to his work. The key identifiers to remember are room scale environments, action based events, ordinary materials, everyday gestures, and a blurred boundary between art and life. Capro is especially important in this course because he helps us connect earlier themes to later ones. He grows out of modern art, but he also opens the door to installation, performance, participation, and immersive contemporary environments. Capro's core idea, is that the line between art and life should be kept as fluid and perceived indistinct as possible. The sentence is extremely important. Capro is rejecting the idea that art should be a precious, isolated object set apart from ordinary experiences. Instead, he wants art to be messy, physical, social, entangled with everyday life. The image of yard is a good example. Car tires are not elevated, polished, noble materials. They are ordinary industrial objects. Yet when they fill a courtyard and ask the viewer to climb and move differently, they become the basis for an artwork. The takeaway on this slide is, well, art is not a precious object stored away in a vault. It is a lived experience. The idea becomes a foundation for much of contemporary installation art. A short biography helps explain how Capro arrived to all these ideas. He studied painting with Hans Hofmann and music with John Cage. Those two influences matter. Hofmann connected him to modernist painting, while Cage opened the door to chance, sound, event, and the idea that ordinary experience could be artistic material. Capro eventually found traditional painting too restrictive. In 1959, he coined the term happening to describe a new form of immersive participatory art event. His materials were often ephemeral and ordinary: ice, tires, paper, wood, physical spaces, and human interaction. They already signal a move away from the permanent masterpieces. So here the context is also important. He reacted against the image of the isolated heroic painter associated with abstract expressionism, but instead he made art social, collaborative, and time-based. His legacy is enormous because he helped redefine art as something that unfolds through time, space, and participation. The slide gives us 4 signature methods that will help you recognize Capro's work. First, ordinary materials. Capro replaces traditional fine art materials with everyday things such as tires, ice, wood, paper, and common actions. That move collapses the distance between art and life. Second, participation. The viewer does not simply observe. The viewer enters, moves, and sometimes acts. In a real sense, the audience helps to complete the work. Third, temporariness. Many of Capro's work are unstable, temporary, or impossible to preserve in the original form. That means the artwork lives in time, not just in space. Fourth is the environment. Capro treats rooms, courtyards, and public sites as the artwork itself. He does not merely place objects in space, he turns space into experience. Together, these methods make Capro essential to understanding installation art as an event, an environment, and a participatory situation. This slide gives us a fuller visual sense of the art. In 1961, Capro staged yard using hundreds of car tires in New York. What matters here is not just the pile of tires as a visual image, but the way the viewer has to confront and navigate them. A courtyard that might normally be a neutral space becomes rough, obstructed, and badly. The recreated versions are also important because they remind us that some installation work survives through restaging rather than through permanent preservation. What gets preserved is not simply an object, but a set of conditions and an experience. Notice that visitors are invited to climb over the tires. That tells us immediately that the bodily engagement is not optional. The work becomes meaningful through movement, risk, awkwardness, and physical negotiation. What does the art do? It transforms an ordinary courtyard into a rough physical environment that must be navigated rather than simply viewed. The first thing to notice is bodily movement. The tires forces viewers to climb, squeeze, and shift their balance. That means the installation does not just occupy space, it reorganizes the viewer's body in space. Second, the material matters. Tires are everyday industrial objects, not traditional sculpture materials. Capros turn something ordinary and functional into an immersive environment. Third, the work feels unstable, messy, and anti-monumental. It does not present itself as a polished symbol of permanence. It feels provisional and lived. And finally, the installation is activated by movement. Without people crossing it, the work remains incomplete. Capro is turning space into an experience rather than a display. Here we move from environmental installation to structured event. 18 Happenings in 6 parts is one of Capro's best-known early works, and it is crucial because it makes art unfold through time. The title itself tells us that this is something organized, sequential, and time-based rather than a single stable object. The image shows that people, actions, zones, props, and instruction all become part of the work. This is why Capro's practice is so important to both installation art and performance art. He is not abandoning objects completely, but he is subordinating them to an event structure. This is also a very good example of why the word happening matters. It signals that art can be something that takes place, not just something that just exists. What does this work do? It turns art into a structured event made of movement, instruction, timing, and participation. The first thing to notice is that it unfolds over time. You cannot understand it all at once in a single glance the way you might approach a painting. It has duration. Second, audience members become part of the artwork simply by attending, moving, and responding. Even watching is no longer passive because the event is organized around bodies in space. Third, the space is divided into zones. That means viewing becomes physical and choreographed. People are guided, separated, repositioned, and made aware of where they are. This is why Capro's work often feels close to theater, ritual, or everyday social behavior. But it's not simple theater, it's a redefinition of what art can be. Fluids is another major work. It gives us a slightly different side of Capro. Here the materials are ice block, rock salt, and participant labor. Already that combination tells us something important. The work depends on collective action, and it is built from a material that is guaranteed to disappear. That disappearance is not an accident. It is part of the meaning. Capro is asking us to think about impermanence, process, labor, and return of the artwork back into the ordinary life. The image is powerful because we see people actively building the structure. This is not a sculpture fabricated elsewhere and delivered to a site. The making, the melting, and the public process are all part of the work. What does fluids do? It uses collective labor and melting ice to make a temporary sculpture that disappears back into ordinary life. The first thing to notice is that participation is essential. The public helps build the work. That means authorship is shared. The act of making becomes part of the art. Second, the material safe introduces time. Ice melts, so the work is built around change, duration, and disappearance. Third, it is a site-specific. It occupies real urban locations and brings art out into the public life rather than keeping it inside the museum. Fourth, documentation becomes important because the original work vanishes. Photographs and records do not replace the work, but they help carry its history. Most importantly, Caprow treats process rather than permanence as the meaning of the artwork. That is one of the key principles students should remember. This slide gives us three strong claims that can help students answer quiz or discussion questions. First, the room is the artwork. Installation artists move beyond the framed image on a wall and create fully enveloping multisensory environments. Architecture is no longer neutral. Second, the viewer is the medium. Without the viewer's physical participation, like climbing, building, moving, playing, entering, the artwork remains inactive. In that sense, the audience shares authorship with the artist. Third, art becomes an event. Happenings and environments are often temporary. The focus shifts from making eternal masterpieces to creating meaningful present tense experiences. These are not only abstract claims, they are practical ways to explain installation art. If students can connect one artwork to one of these claims using concrete evidence, they will be on a very solid ground. So let's talk now about the expansion artist, four different directions. So we expand out from Capro to four different directions in installation art. Team Lab represents digital immersion. Their responsive projection environments surround the viewer with moving image, light, and algorithmic space. Christophe and Jean-Claude represent environmental intervention. Their temporary projects transform public landscapes on monumental scale. Adela Andea represents the techno-organic direction. Her luminous electronic environments feel chaotic, immersive, and almost alive. Meow Wolf represents a narrative world building. Their installations combine immersion, participation, exploration, and storytelling. Together, these artists show that installation art is not one style. It is a broad field that can be raw or polished, temporary or semi-permanent, public or museum-based, conceptual or entertaining, analog or digital. TeamLab is an international collective made up of artists, programmers, engineers, architects, and designers. That interdisciplinary structure is important because it shows how contemporary installation art often depends on collaboration and complex systems. Their connection to today's theme is clear. They create installations that surround the viewer with moving light, image, and responsive space. Their connection to Capro is also very useful. Like Capro, they require the viewer to enter the work physically. But unlike Capro, their environments are driven by digital systems, projection, mapping, and sensors and algorithms. The key terms here are immersion. TeamLab does not just present an image, it surrounds the viewer with a responsive visual field that shifts according to the presence and movement. This work is Universe of Water Particles on a rock where people gather from 2018, shown in Tokyo. What should we look for? First, the digital artwork reacts to the viewer's presence. The simulated water shifts around people's bodies and feet. That means the work is interactive rather than fixed. There are no frames. The images spread across walls and floors, so individual works bleed into one another. This is a very different model from a traditional museum display. Immersion is total. Projection mapping and algorithmic rendering create an environment that feels atmospheric, fluid, and unstable. This is a good moment to remind students that installation art can now operate through code and responsive systems. But the basic questions remains very similar to Capro. What kind of experience is created when the viewer physically enters the artwork? Christo and Jean-Claude are a major player in environmental installation. They are known for large-scale, temporary interventions in natural and urban space. And the fact they funded their projects themselves is also significant. It emphasizes independence and the extraordinary scale of planning involved. Their connection to today's theme is that they treat the entire landscape as an installation site. Instead of transforming a room, they may transform a shoreline, a valley, a bridge, or a park. Their connection to Capro is especially strong in relation to fluids. Like Capro, they create temporary work that depends on time, labor, and large-scale coordination. But they operate on a monumental civic scale. The key term here is site-specific. Their work cannot simply be lifted out of place without losing its meaning. This work is the Gates, conceived over many years and installed in 2005 in the Central Park in New York. The first thing to notice is scale. 7,537 fabric gates extending over 23 miles of pathway. That is an extraordinary transformation of a familiar public space. Second, the project was temporary. It lasted only 16 days. That matters because the work was designed as an event in public time, not as a permanent monument. Third, it is deeply site-specific. It changed how pedestrians navigated and perceived Central Park. Walking became the primary mode of viewing the installation. This is an excellent example of installation art moving beyond the gallery and into shared civic space. The work altered not visual appearance, but also public behavior, circulation, awareness to the landscape. Adela Andea represents a different direction within installation art. She is presented here as a Romanian-born, Texas-based artist known for illuminated, kinetic, maximalist light installations. The Texas connection is useful for our class because it places contemporary installation practice within a regional context that students can relate to more directly. And yes, this is also the moment in the lecture when your professor, me, appears in her own slide deck. So, for a brief moment, the course becomes a kind of site-specific installation. We are talking about immersive environments, and suddenly the person guiding you through the materials is also inside the material. That is a little bit funny to me. But it also fits the theme surprisingly well because installation art often collapses the distance between observer and participant. Her connection to the theme is that she fills spaces with pulsing technological networks that mimic biological growth. In other words, technology is reorganized so that it feels organic, unstable, and alive. Her connection to Capro is also interesting. Like Capro, she builds environments out of commercial or industrial materials. But compared with Capro's raw grid, her installations are more luminous, aesthetic, and futuristic. The key term for installation art itself, because the work expands the room, transforms the viewer's environment. This work is called Chaos Incarnate from 2021. An immersive installation made with electronics, LEDs, cables, mixed media at the Center for International Light Art in Unna, Germany. What should we notice? First, technology is reorganized into something that feels organic and alive. Cables, lights, and electronic components stop reading as purely technical equipment, and they begin to feel like a kind of artificial ecosystem. Second, the work expands into the room rather than staying confined to a base or a frame. That means the installation must be experienced spatially, not visually. Third, color, light, and suspended form create immersion. The viewer is surrounded by technological environment that feel almost biological. Why is this useful in contrast with Capro? Capro often used plain everyday materials in raw ways. Here, industrial materials become highly aestheticized and immersive, producing a techno-organic version of the installation art. Meowwolf brings installation art into a hybrid space between art, entertainment, and storytelling. They are a Santa Fe-based collective known for maximalist interactive multimedia environments. Their importance for this lecture is that they show how installation art can become a multi-room narrative system. Their connection to the theme is that they merge installation with theme space, participation, and non-linear storytelling. Viewers do not simply observe. They explore, they search, open, crawl, piece together fragments of a story world. Their connection to Capro is provocative. In some ways, Meow Wolf can be seen as a commercial evolution of The Happening. Immersive, participatory, social, and experience-driven, but not developed into more permanent large-scale labyrinths. So don't forget the key term here is participation. This slide focuses on Radio Tave in Houston, which again gives us a very direct local connection. What should students notice? First, participation is gamified. Visitors physically open doors, crawl through unexpected spaces, and touch objects in order to uncover story elements. That means the body is not just present, it is actively engaged in problem solving and discovery. Second, storytelling and environment merge into one experience. The space is not just decorated, the environment itself carries narrative information. Third, the work shows how installation art can function as both art space and narrative system. It is immersive, but it's also structured like an explorable story. And finally, it achieves immersion by stripping away traditional gallery rules. This is not a space defined by do not touch. Instead, touch and movement are expected. That makes it a very contemporary example of installation art shaped by participation. Let's bring the 5 approaches together. Alan Capro gives us happening and environment. Everyday life becomes participatory art. TeamLab gives up digital immersion, responsive light and projected spaces. Christo and Jean-Claude give us an environment for intervention, temporary transformation of public spaces. Adela Andea gives us techno-organic installation. Electronic material becomes living environments. Meowulf gives us narrative world building. Immersive spaces become an explorable story. This synthesis matters because it helps students see the installation art is not defined by one material or one look. It is defined by how artists transform the space, involve the viewer, and structure the experience. Use this slide as a study guide. Know the vocabulary first. Installation art, immersion, participation, site-specific, and happening. Know the theme claims. The room is the artwork, the viewer is the medium, and art becomes an event rather than a permanent object. Note the key Capro facts. He coined the term happening in 1959, reacting against isolated abstract expressionist painting, and shifted attention from the object to the experience. Also note the Capro identifiers, participation, everyday materials, and temporary environments. A very good way to prepare for the quiz is to take one image and explain it using one vocabulary term, one theme claim, and 2 or 3 concrete details about how the viewer is meant to move or participate. Use this slide to practice quick recognition. For Capro, remember Yard, 18 happenings in 6 parts, and fluids. Look for ordinary materials, participation, temporariness, and transformation of space into experience. For TeamLab, remember the immersive digital environment, large-scale projections, and responsive interaction. For Christo and Jean-Claude, remember the gates and the temporary transformation of public pathways. For Adela Andea, remember chaos incarnate and the dense luminous environment made from electronic materials. For Meowulf, remember Radio Tave and the idea of a story world that must be physically explored. When identifying an image, students should also say one sentence about what work does. Do not stop at naming an artist. Explain how the space is transforming and how the viewer becomes part of the piece. This final slide lists the primary image sources and supporting art historical context. For this course, the important habit is to begin with a reliable museum, archives, and artist sources for basic facts like title, date, materials, place, and context. That concludes theme number 5, installation, environment, participation, immersion. In the next theme, we will move naturally into performance art, where the body itself becomes the medium and the event becomes even more central.